This is The Guardian.
Reged Ahmad here on Gadigal Land with the full story. Donald Trump's war in Iran, Russia's war in Ukraine, and of course the climate crisis. These are the main driving forces behind our move towards renewable energy in Australia. But while we're being pushed inexorably towards cleaner technologies, how we feel about that transition is another thing altogether. In fact, new research has found that organised campaigns against wind and solar farms are working, undermining general support for renewable energy. Today, environment and climate correspondent Graham Readfearn on where Australia falls down in its transition to renewable energy and who is to blame. It's Wednesday, the 5th of August. Hi, Graham. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Reged. How are you?
I'm good. I want to start by asking you what surprised you about this survey into attitudes towards renewable energy in Australia?
Yeah, so I have been looking at this, and I should say the Facebook algorithm definitely knows I've been looking at this because I feel like I'm a living case study here. Every second or third post that I get now is somebody complaining about renewable energy. I think Facebook is convinced that I might be a One Nation renewable energy hating voter. My YouTube algorithm isn't much different either. I'm almost convinced that there's not a single person in Australia that likes renewable energy, but we know that that's not true.
And how do we know that's not true? Tell us about this survey and what it found.
This is an attempt to try and understand the level of, they call it deep support in Australia for the renewable energy transition and all of the technologies as well that are part of that. It's done by a company called 89 Degrees East, and it's led by a social researcher called Dr. Rebecca Huntley. What they're trying to do is work out where is the community's head at. With a lot of these surveys, it's shallow. They ask someone a question, do you like solar power? And they go, yeah, okay. And they tick a box. This is not doing that. This is asking 4 questions to try and understand just how much they do actually support renewables. So they're asking them things like, do you personally support it? Do you think it's good for Australia? Would you talk about it positively to your friends? And how much support do you think the rest of the community has got? And this is where the first really interesting part of this comes in. About 62%, something like that, where there is deep support. And he'd also find some interesting, what the researchers call a perception gap. One is, for example, that 62% of people, again, same number, but it's 62% of people think that the amount of renewable energy generation in Australia is below 30%. But it's actually about 46%. So people think that we are a lot further back in this journey than we really are. And that's just one of these perception gaps that they've uncovered.
So in terms of the little social media example you just gave us, that basically shows us that people personally might be quite keen on renewables, but they have this view that everybody else isn't.
Yeah, they think that everyone else in the community is against it. And so that stops them from saying positive things about it. It maybe makes them feel that if they do speak out, there might be some intimidation or they might lose some friends. I think the social media algorithms are really good at reinforcing this.
The survey did say, well, people are really enthusiastic about electric cars. There's different forms of renewables that they like. But it did find that there was a genuine drop in support for a particular type of renewable projects, onshore wind and solar farms.
Yes. The drop is quite small, but if you like, it's 1 or 2 percentage points here and there, depending on the question that they asked. But if you think that we're in a situation where the government definitely is supporting a very rapid transition and it wants to have a social license to push these projects through and to push this policy through, then those numbers need to be going up. And they're not. They're either stagnating or they're falling. Dr. Rebecca Huntley, who, as I said, led this research, She says that the golden number here is about 70%. You get to 70%, and there's a feeling that that means a strong social license for the transition or for these different pieces of technology. It's not there yet, and it's not getting there. So then we kind of have to ask, well, why not? Why is it that people don't want to talk about these technologies as much to their friends?
Well, that's exactly the question I want to ask you, because you do report on this heavily. What is it about campaigns or any kind of conversation around onshore wind and solar farms that might have led to this drop in support?
If you're living in a rural community and you're active on Facebook and you like looking at YouTube and things like that, then you're going to come across videos of people who look like you and sound like you and are like you. They're other farmers and other landholders complaining about renewables, sometimes really quite vociferously. And while the number of those people may be quite small, they may be in a minority in the community. If you're sitting at home looking at that, you're going to go, God, everybody hates this stuff. So I don't want to go out and talk positively about it because I might get victimized in the community. We know that some of these campaigns are genuine community campaigns and there's genuine concerns. And I really don't want to kind of suggest that everything is coming up roses in rural areas. There are lots of problems, and we can talk a little bit about that because the industry has actually said, Jackie Trad, who is the chief executive of the Clean Energy Council, she said that the industry has got a real problem here with trust. She said they just don't have it in rural areas. And she said that what the communities believe determines what gets built.
So let's pull those two things apart, first of all, because we do want to reflect on what the genuine concerns are. But in terms of what we might see on social media, are we seeing problems with misinformation? Are we seeing it coming down to politicking from some political parties who don't have the climate crisis as part of their platform? What's going on there?
Things get mixed. So people get messages from organised campaigns. All these groups have run and are running organised campaigns. And a big part of that is let's find people who don't like renewables, let's interview them, and let's put that information out there. Again, I'm not saying that the people who are being interviewed are not sincere about what their concerns are. But there is misinformation mixed in with that. And a lot of it comes down to a couple of claims. One is that the reason that people's electricity prices have been going up is because of renewable energy. And they think that somehow the energy system is less reliable than it was before. And that's also because of renewables. Those are two really, really big pieces of information that are out there. I've described this as like the big political lie that Conservatives have placed on communities. They've said the reason your electricity prices are going up is because of renewables and it's because of all this net zero rubbish. And that is not true. The reason why people's electricity prices have gone up, well, it started with the war in Ukraine. Our electricity prices are linked to high international gas and coal prices. So that's been one of the main drivers for an increase in people's electricity prices. It's really got very, very little to do with renewable energy. And in fact, if we look at the wholesale price of electricity, which makes up about a third of people's bills, that's dropped by about 47% in the last 12 months, according to the Australian Energy Market Operator. And then if we look at this issue around reliability, people have this perception that we're getting blackouts all the time, but we actually just don't. There's been some research that's found that less than 1% of outages are actually down to a lack of power, which may have something to do with the amount of renewables in the system. So 99% of the time when we have outages, I talked to Alison Reeve, who's the head of the energy program at the Grattan Institute. She said it's mostly rats getting into substations and people driving into power poles that cause localized blackouts. There's obviously lots of other things, but it's nearly always to do with the network, the poles, the wires, or the towers. And it's almost nothing to do with renewables.
So we've got some people saying online that there are these criticisms to do with renewables that aren't accurate, but there are genuine concerns in regional and rural areas, especially when it comes to wind and solar projects. So what are those?
There definitely are. So people are worried about a lack of consultation, and the industry has been heavily criticised, even by its own its own industry body that it's not done a good enough job of talking to the community about what's coming and what's being proposed. So communities are getting surprised. And if you surprise somebody with a big project, that's not going to bring trust, and it's not going to set the conversation in a way where the communities are going to be able to get good benefits. So that's one big one. Another one is that people are worried about what it's going to do maybe to their land values, or what a local project might do to the way that rainfall disperses along their property. What might it do to any biodiversity issues that are there, like sort of clearing of trees and things like that? These are all issues which really do need to be ironed out. And what I said in a column I wrote a couple of days ago was that I really don't think that when we have political leaders like, and we'll maybe talk about what Matt Canavan, Angus Taylor did last week, when we have political elites driving misinformation into the conversation, that's actually not going to help those communities get the most out of these projects that are coming to them, these large solar farms and these wind farms.
Coming up next, have renewable energy companies got it wrong? Graham, a lot of the renewable projects that we're talking about have really been pushed by Labor. It's their policy. But what about the role of opposition political parties? What are they saying? How much are they behind or not behind these projects?
Yeah, I mean, good question. And a really good example of this was a very recent episode of the Karl Stefanovic show. Karl Stefanovic hosted what he described as the Great Net Zero debate in a cattle sale yard near Rockhampton. And on the debate panel was Matt Canavan, the Nationals leader, Angus Taylor, the Liberal leader, and Colin Boyce, who's an MP up in that region who is not a fan of climate science generally. We had Angus Taylor seemingly trialling a new kind of little phrase where he was saying that renewable energy drives up prices and drives down reliability.
Oh, so we haven't heard that before.
Well, we've heard versions of it, but it's kind of a nice, tight little political phrase. But as I've said, renewable energy has not driven up prices. There's very little evidence for it. What he doesn't talk about, for example, is there's some interesting work from the CSIRO very recently that looked at, well, what would happen if we didn't have a net zero policy? What would happen to electricity prices? Is there a cheaper route here that we could take? And the answer was no. Because we've got a lot of electricity generation in the system that needs to be replaced, all these old coal plants, for example, if you replace them with coal plants, you're still spending millions and millions and millions of dollars for that new capacity. You have to spend whatever. So your prices are going to go up, whatever happens. One of their solutions, of course, is nuclear, probably one of the most expensive forms of electricity that you could put on the grid if it was legal. And then we had Matt Canavan, who, again, came up with quite a catchy little line when he talked about a project called Net Zero Australia, which he said was smart people at the University of Melbourne and Princeton and the University of Queensland. And he said, this group has said that you're going to have to cover 12 million hectares of Australia with this stuff, the stuff being wind turbines and solar farms. And that, he said, was the same space as 2 Tasmanias. Again, it's really catchy. I went to Net Zero Australia and said, is this right? And their most recent report suggests that the direct footprint to completely decarbonise Australia's grid would be 500,000 hectares, 24 times less than the 2 Tasmanias that Matt Canavan claims.
So there's a lot of distrust around there, because you do hear people in regional communities talk about how, this is power generated for the cities, but there's nothing in it for us.
Yeah. And the Clean Energy Council that represents the renewables industry has actually proposed in the last week or so that there needs to be a national scheme where renewable companies that are running projects have to have a fixed fee for every megawatt hour that goes into communities. That's one of their solutions to this problem. And it actually does show, there's been other research that shows that when communities actually get some financial return that's real, that the level of opposition tends to fall away. When we've had past resource booms, like you've had coal come through, and coal and gas, and even gold going even further back, communities can point to they can point to libraries and town halls and art centres that were built with the money from those big industries coming in.
So they saw the benefit of fossil fuels.
They can see it. It's there. It's a physical thing. They go, look, coal built that. Or gas built that.
So, Graham, does that mean that renewable energy companies have been doing it all wrong?
I think it's been incredibly patchy, is what I would say. Where it's not been done well is where you get people making complaints, and those complaints go everywhere else. It's important probably we don't fall into the trap, and we almost have here, by saying, look, in the communities, everybody hates it. And actually, the surveys show that that's not right. Actually, there is good support. It's just not good enough.
And surely then, perhaps, if renewable energy companies aren't showing and putting the benefits of renewable energy projects back in the community, doesn't that make misinformation campaigns and politicking more successful? Because it's tapping into something that's there.
And it's also it's filling a gap. People are looking around going, well, what's in this for us? And then somebody comes along and says, well, I don't know what's in it for you, but I'll tell you what, it's going to raise your electricity prices. It's going to damage the environment. It's going to make your electricity less reliable. And they all go, oh, well, I'm on board with that. And you can see how very quickly a misinformation campaign can tap into an existing sort of disquiet in the community. And that's problematic.
If it just requires renewable energy companies to rethink and share some profits, that's essentially what we're talking about. What would it take to make that happen?
The industry in its annual summit a week or two ago said that they really need to see this a national legislated scheme. They're looking to do some work with the federal government to try and agree a national scheme that could be rolled out everywhere. But they are also calling on the companies doing this work that they really, really need to do the consultation better. It needs to be genuine.
So what do experts tell you about the possibility of legislation to force a redistribution of some of the benefits, especially when we have the politicians you're talking about who are just generally opposed to these projects?
It's early days. The industry only raised this issue as an idea a couple of weeks ago, but I will say that I think we have been aware of this problem and this lack of consistency in the approach that renewable energies are taking. We've been aware of that for a couple of years. That is not news to the federal government or to state governments either. So I guess you would have to hope that wherever the policy takes them, it takes them to a place where communities are getting genuinely consulted and they get genuine benefits that are long-lasting.
Graham, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thanks, Reged.
That was environment and climate correspondent Graham Readfearn. This episode was produced by Taylor Strano, sound design and mixing by Lou Hill, and the executive producer of Full Story is Hannah Parks. Don't forget to subscribe or follow Full Story wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also leave a review. I'm Reged Ahmad. See you soon.